And good evening to those of the Potomac Conference. It's a nice, crisp fall evening, the night before our national election, so I hope everyone will be involved with their civic duty if you haven't already. And if not, get out to vote tomorrow is also both our civic and also just a spiritual responsibility to be engaged in what's going on in our communities. So thank you again for joining us here this evening. I have the officers here with us, and also our VPs, as we're prepared to be able to give you some information as to the kinds of things that have been taking place since we last were together way back at the end of May, 1st of June. And so thank you for taking some of your time this evening to join us. My name is Dr. Bill Miller, President of the Potomac Conference. Looking forward to just having some of this time with you. We're going to try the virtual again in a way that we can stay in contact with each other. And we're getting better and better at this thing called virtual meetings in order so that we can remain safe and that we can be able to continue to utilize methods of communication that can keep the mission of God going forward. So there will be some different reports from the different ones this evening from our officers, as well as the VP of Education and Pastoral Ministry. So let me take just a moment for those who don't know our team to introduce them. And I'm going to have each one of them introduce themselves because then the camera will automatically shift to them. So I'm going to start to my left.
I'm Rick Jordan, and I'm the Vice President for Pastoral Ministries.
I'm Jose Vasquez. I'm the Vice President for Administration.
And I'm Dave Vanderveer, Vice President of Finance.
Good evening. My name is Steve Lang, and I'm Vice President of Education.
During this time of COVID, it was initially, if you remember all the way back when we got started, way back in March, it was going to be a 2 to 4 week period of time in which we were going to flatten the curve. Well, here we are almost 9 months later, still dealing with COVID in ways that none of us ever dreamed. But we need to continue to work at methods of figuring out how it is that we are going to flatten fear, not just the curve. We cannot allow fear to force us into some corners and by means of that, not follow through with the mission that God has called us to. But we as the church, the Seventh-day Adventist Church, we're still on the move. In fact, last week we had 3 different days doing the same thing, but at different locations throughout the conference, pastors' meetings. They were in person. We followed all the safety protocols, but it was invigorating to hear the reports of what is happening in the local churches, the creativity that so many of you are utilizing to be able to keep the mission and the message going forward. For the message is not in quarantine, neither is God. And so we need to be able to continue to just find new ways to present the gospel, as well as new ways in order to connect with our communities. And so much is going on. And this evening, as a way that we can communicate this, we do have, if you're just getting online as well, 2 translation rooms. There's one, you'll see it at the bottom of your screen on the Zoom, interpretation rooms. And there's a Spanish interpretation and also a Portuguese. So we want to give a special thanks to Dr. Jimmy Munoz and also Josant Barrientos, as well as Jesse Nascimento and Teresina Baboya. Thank you for helping us with our translation this evening. But just go to the bottom of the screen there. You can go into those rooms. Now, if you have a question and you're not sure how to do it in English, that's okay. Go ahead and type your question in Spanish and or Portuguese, and Josant Barrientos or Teresina will translate that question to us in English so that we can answer that question. And then they'll give you that answer back to you in your language. Now, it could be that there are some of the questions that we might be able, if they're just kind of a technical question or just a little clarity, if on the Q&A that you also see at the bottom of your screen, go ahead and type in that question there, and we'll answer those questions out of the Q&A as well. And that way that we can keep the evening going. But if you have another question of a larger that is deemed that it would be of interest to everyone in the conference, then we will go ahead and we will, that question will be given to me, and then we'll designate someone to be able to answer that question. We also want to give another special thanks to those who are working behind the scenes. Deborah Anderson, who's assistant to the president and also director for communication. Tiffany Doss, who also works in our communication, along with our IT department, both Frank Cox and Adele Bach. And also one other individual who does a lot of work behind the scene with film and all the rest of that is Jeremy. So we want to give a very, very special thanks to each of you for helping us out, setting this all together. So we'll see how it goes. If you'd like to give us feedback, we would love to get the feedback so that we can learn to continue to do this better. For especially during this time, it seems that this is the right way for us to be able to communicate. So we're going to be going here for till 8 o'clock. And again, if we didn't get to all the questions, still don't hesitate to ask those questions. We will get back to you. Just leave a contact way that we can get back to you on a particular question. And we will be glad to answer those questions on a one-on-one basis if we don't have time during our time this evening. But this evening, I want to just take a few moments, and I'm going to bring something up on the screen of a text that I'd like us to just focus on briefly here. And that's critical to what we are about here in Potomac. As you know, our mission statement it's right there at the bottom of the screen. We exist to grow healthy disciple-making churches. That is why we exist. We exist to make disciples of Jesus, who make disciples of Jesus, who make disciples of Jesus. But a text that means a lot to us. We're reminded in John 15, Jesus, just prior to his going through the whole trial and crucifixion, said, "You did not choose me." But what does he say? "I chose you." That's an incredible statement of affirmation to those of us who, like his disciples, are by any means, we're not perfect. We stumble, we make mistakes, but yet Jesus chose us anyway. It says, "You didn't choose me, I chose you and appointed you so that you might go and bear fruit." What was the fruit that Jesus was talking about? I know this time of the season, I enjoy the fall season because there's a lot of the different kinds of fruits that come on. And you know, there's everything from, of course, at this time of the year, you've got the latter part of pear season. We're still getting some really good pears, and we're getting some oranges, and one of my favorite fruits, apples. And to be able to go out into some of the farms and both. I have yet to find on an apple tree a pineapple. I have yet to find on an apple tree an olive. They don't grow fruit that they're not designed to do. What kind of fruit did Jesus design us, his disciples, to bear? It's other disciples. We exist to grow disciples. And in the next phrase is so important, fruit that will last. In other words, he doesn't anticipate that we go and just baptize someone and leave them out in the cold to figure it out on their own. No, we are to develop and build fruit, disciples that will last. And so that whatever you ask in my name, the Father will give you. What a promise. Whatever we ask in the context of this passage is bearing fruit, building the kingdom, creating disciples through his grace and truth. Whatever you ask in my name, the Father will give you. This is my command. Love each other. What a powerful message that is found in John chapter 15. So you see that the mission does not change. Methods must change during these times. We are called to reach people, to bear fruit. But the way we are going to have to go around, especially during COVID and the times of injustice and other things, we're going to have to probably change some of our methods in order to be able to bear the fruit that Jesus has called us to bear. There's a statement from one of my favorite authors. You will recognize the author. It's found in letter 169, written in 1904. And Ellen White suggests that God has placed upon every believer. And you know my statement about that. Define every. That's all of us in this room. It's everyone who's listening. It's everyone who takes the name of Jesus. Every believer, the responsibility of helping to rescue the most needy, the most helpless, the most oppressed. Christians are to be Christ-like in their earnest desire to save souls. You see, saving souls is the first step in discipleship. It's not the last step or the middle step. Saving them, bringing someone into relationship with Jesus where they understand the forgiveness of Jesus and what his grace will do in their life. That is step one. And then it's developing them in that belief system to the point where they too then can go out and save souls and disciple somebody else into the process. And so the promise here that we have is that it's our responsibility. What a promise. It's a responsibility to save souls. And Jesus has entrusted that to us. And so I'm reminded within the context of our vision that we anticipate over the next 5 years to still work towards the goal of doubling our membership. We have a ways to go, but we're getting closer and closer as we are creating disciples for Jesus. We anticipate that 70% of our churches will become healthy. We believe that in our communities of 20,000 or more, whether it be a people group or just a community at large, we need to have an Adventist presence. We need to be planting churches in those communities. That's the kingdom. That's the area. That's our part of the vineyard that God has called us to go and to serve. And we also believe that every one of our schools should be healthy. There is no greater ministry that any local church can have than a school. Because a school properly designed that is healthy is discipling our young people every day of the week. That is the primary purpose of our Adventist education. So we need to learn to leverage our situations in his power to make disciples for Jesus. And one last text I'd like to refer to. It's found in Matthew chapter 9, verses 37 and 38. Then he said to his disciples, "The harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. Ask the Lord of the harvest, therefore, to send out workers into his harvest fields." So Jesus is praying and he's talking about us, disciple makers. We are his disciples, and therefore we have the privilege to be the workers in his vineyard, to go out because he has already cast the vision. The harvest is plentiful. I don't know about you, but I'm looking forward to Jesus' soon return. And we know that when he comes, there will be a plentiful harvest because we have engaged with him to do his work. Before we transition into our next part of our town hall, I'd like to invite you to bow your heads and let's have a word of prayer. Father in heaven, as we meet this evening and just have a chance to share what we see, the incredible workings of your Spirit, in spite of the pandemic, in spite of all the other unrests that are going on around us, your Spirit is at work, moving on hearts and transitioning us to a place of even better work for you, that we can bear fruit. So Father, bless each of our congregations, bless each of our members, bless us, that we will be faithful workers because the harvest is plentiful. That is our prayer. And you have said that if we ask in your name, you will hear it. That is our prayer in your name. Amen. This evening, then, I just want to introduce the different topics. And I have just a few remarks, and then I will be turning the time over first to our Vice President of Administration. He'll talk to us about our upcoming constituency that we have. Had to reschedule a little bit. And then our Vice President of Finance will be speaking, and he'll be giving us an update on our finances, our tithe, as well as our PPP, as well as the different, really some incredible victories that God has given us in the midst of this COVID time. And then our Vice President of Pastoral Ministry will be sharing a lot of what's going on in our local churches. And as I suggested earlier, we heard some absolutely exciting things that were going on here in our churches this last week as well. And then our Vice President of Education will also give us an update as to what is happening. You know, last year we had to shut all of our schools down, then we went through the summertime, and now we started a new school year and we're well into the year. And he's got some exciting things to share with us there as well. But a lot has happened to us because of COVID since last March. It's been an incredible way that we have found to be able to continue to stay in touch with our workforce. Twice a month, we have continued to have a conversation with our principals and our pastors and our employees. On a as-needed basis, our pastoral ministries team is still having a pastors get-together on Tuesdays. They were doing that weekly, especially during the first times we were kind of getting established and trying to figure out what is the best way for us to continue to lead through this. But the reality is every one of us in every congregation has changed, whether we want to have done it or not. We have to change. And I know that one of the stories that really excited me over the time that I listened from the pastors was from one of our Spanish churches, where they were going to have a communion, and they ended up doing a Friday night foot washing, and then Sabbath they did on Sabbath during the service did the emblems. And what was so fascinating about that is I joked with the pastor afterward. I said, if you had to take that to the board and dreamed about that ahead of time, how long would that have taken to go all the way through the board? And we kind of chuckled and said we probably still would be talking about that. But there are many other stories and many other examples of the kinds of things that we've all had to change during this time of COVID. Whether it's how we do the presentations from the classrooms, our teachers, how they're having to do virtual. But there still is a need to continue to be about the mission and not get lost in methods that we think are unchangeable. We must continue to look at making our methods match where we have to take the mission. God has called us not to change for the sake of change, but for the sake of the mission. And so it is that we are going to continue to move forward with the mission that God has called us. He has not changed that in any way. And whether there are issues of justice, injustice, racial tensions, racial prejudice, injustice, none of those things are acceptable, period. But we must find new ways in which we can continue to address those issues. Even within the context of our conference, we have started a task force that has given us a preliminary report, and we're going to continue. We'll be developing that out with our executive committee to help us understand how can we continue to do better in doing what John 15 says. And this is my command, love one another. And so my challenge to each one of us is that we will continue to work on all of these issues together in a way that will bring honor and glory to God. So at this time, I'd like to turn our time over to our Vice President of Administration, Jose Vasquez. If you would please speak to us about the upcoming constituency and some of the issues that we're facing.
Yes, good evening, everyone. It's good to be here with you this evening. And as Bill said, COVID has affected the way we do things, the way we conduct business here at the conference, and the way we do church. And so one of the things that has been affected is our constituency meeting. But we are pushing ahead. We are pushing ahead with our date of March 14, 2021. And in preparation for that, we have done a couple of things. The first thing is that we have purchased a very accurate touchless thermometer. And that takes the temperature as you go by. Is instantaneous, so it is very, very good. As we think about the constituency meeting, we will follow the CDC state and local health guidelines. And then number 3, well, that includes social distancing. We are going to require everyone to have a mask on during our meetings, and there's going to be hand sanitizing stations throughout the venue. We are going to sanitize the microphones, and we are going to sanitize the venue during the break, during the lunch hour. So that's in preparation for our constituency meeting scheduled for March 14. Now, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about our Vision 2025. We started this vision in 2010 when our membership was 32,000, and we wanted to double that in 5 years. Well, we have extended that to 2025, so that is the time. And as you can see, this is the total baptisms throughout the years, and then as you can see, for the first quarter of 2020, the first 3 quarters, I'm sorry, the number is 381 reported baptisms. And of course, 32,000 So we have baptized 12,851 so far, and that represents a 40.15% of the goal so far. Here's another graph that shows, in a different way, how it looks. So 40.15% of the goal has been reached so far in baptisms and professions of faith. Now, just briefly, a lot of churches throughout the conference say we just want to applaud the efforts of different churches throughout the conference in trying to reach not only the members but also the people in the community. And many churches have become very creative in doing that, and so we are grateful for that. Just to give you a little snapshot, the Beltsville Church is active in helping the community and members, and they help 10 to 15 families a week with rent and utilities. And then on Fridays, they have the parking lot assistance that they do to 500 families per week. And they've been doing that since April. Another church that's been very active is Pastor Carlo Duran, which pastors 3 churches, the Bealton, Culpeper, and Sterling Spanish churches in our conference. In Bealton, they help 70 families a week. In Culpeper, Spanish, they help 50 to 60 families a week. And in Sterling, they help 30 families, sometimes 100 families a week. So we just want to thank everyone for being involved and just trying to reach out into the community during this time. The mission has not stopped, and so we applaud the leaders and the pastors of those churches. And so that's my report.
All right. Thank you very much for that, Jose. Appreciate those updates as we continue to see in a variety of ways the way that the mission is moving forward. So at this time, another part of the mission is how do we, in one way or another, through our finances, also keep the mission going. So I'm going to invite Dave Vanderveer, our Vice President for Finance, if you would address that issue for us. Dave.
Okay. It is my privilege to be able to give the finance report for the conference as of this date. And so the first thing that we want to focus on is the tithe report. And the tithe report is very good considering the context in which we live. Through the end of September 30 of this year, our tithe loss stood at 1.55%. That was a loss. Now, usually a conference treasurer would not be excited at all over a tithe loss. However, I am grateful for this, as at the beginning of the pandemic, back in March, when different segments of society began to shut down, estimates were that the loss of tithe income across North America might be as high as 30 or 40%. We are very grateful for God's blessing, for the faithfulness of his people, and continuing to support the kingdom and God's work with the tithe. And so this loss of 1.55%, while significant, is very workable with. And so we are very excited to be at this point, at this time of the year. God has further blessed in that in previous years there have been significant windfalls, that is one-time gifts of tithe coming from various sources. We did not know if this was going to continue in this year, the pandemic, and we were very grateful as God blessed and people remained faithful to him. And some windfalls did come in during the summer, as they have in years before, in even greater amounts than before. $626,000 in tithe windfalls were received as compared to previous year. Now, we do not budget on the tithe windfall from year to year. We want to be conservative in our budgeting, but this is where we stand as of this point, and we are grateful for that. Now, we also want to look at the impact that the pandemic and this tithe loss, even though slight, could have on the conference for this year. One of the ways we measure this is by a financial measure of strength, which we call working capital. This is one that all conferences across North America use. And it is recommended that we have 100% of this measure of financial strength. Now, at the end of 2019, the Potomac Conference was in a very strong position with working capital that exceeded 140% of the recommended levels. This allows us to adjust and to work in catastrophic situations, such as what we have experienced. Now, this working capital will be reduced as we have had to draw on it, as we have had to draw on education reserves. So, we do not know exactly what will happen with the tithe the next 3 months, but as we estimate ahead, we estimate that the tithe loss for this year will be somewhere between 0 or a 10% loss. Now, that loss, of course, reduces our assets that make up working capital. And also the education reserve has been drawn down this year. And depending on the amount of tithe loss, that education reserve can be reduced by 25 to 50%. This is to provide assistance to our schools so that they can continue to operate. We've given relief for both the last school year and for the current school year as well. Now, when you combine the tithe loss and the estimated reductions in the education reserve, we find that our working capital decrease could be as much as 6 to 20%. Now, we do anticipate a rebound in 2021, and I'll explain a little more in detail here in just a moment. This relates to our participating in the PPP, or the Paycheck Protection Program, which was the general economic relief that the federal government supplied for all profit and nonprofit, public and private organizations across the U.S. During the legislation came out in March and April of this year. We anticipate when that income is fully realized in 2021, there will be a rebound. So we kind of anticipate a roller coaster in this working capital measure. It's going to go down in 2020. It will come back up in 20 and 21 because of receiving this income. Now, let me talk a little bit more about that because this is a matter of some complexity. The PPP was carefully studied and discussed at length at the executive committee level with legal counsel, with those in higher church organizations, and it was determined that this legislation participating in this disaster relief did not endanger the religious exercise of our faith. And so we also believed in careful study of Ellen White, but primarily the Bible as well, that it was not contrary to biblical counsel either. So we did participate in this program, and the conference received a forgivable loan that would turn into a grant if used in the appropriate ways. The amount was $5.4 million. And I have summarized on the screen here a chart that shows the categories for which this money could be used according to the legislation. The first area is payroll costs. And we note that 89% of the total was used to help 561 employees at all levels of the church organization. In addition, the interest on 53 mortgages was assisted with. This was also primarily at the local church and school level. Rent and lease payments received support of almost 2%, or $96,000. An additional 92 properties across the conference received utility expense support as well. If we look at the participation in this program as broken up by institutions, we find that local churches and schools are going to receive about 18% of the relief directly. Living Well, Shenandoah Valley Academy, and Tacoma Academy together will receive about 16% of the proceeds. About 66% will be designated at the conference level because this is where the majority of the cost of the Potomac Conference occur, because this is where the pastors, teachers, and staff are paid from. So this is the breakdown amongst the institutions. Now, according to the federal guidelines, we first submit our application after a careful accounting of the utilization of these funds to the bank. And we did that on September 17th. The bank reviewed and approved our application for this loan to be converted into a grant. That was done during the month of October. Federal regulations provide that the Small Business Administration has 90 days to review this application and to grant official approval. We anticipate that happening in January of 2021. At that point, the full reimbursement for the churches who chose to participate for their utilities as well as their lease payments will be distributed to them, again, after we have received the full forgiveness officially. There are other financial blessings that we need to speak for just a moment or two, and that is that just today we received word of the final closing of the sale of the Elm Avenue property, which was formerly the J&A facility located in Tacoma Park. This is a facility that has been on the market for several years and will be key in relieving the debt of Tacoma Academy Preparatory School, which was a combination of the merger of the J&A Elementary and the Sligo Elementary Schools. This will enable the elementary school of TA Prep to retire significant debt, as well as provide scholarships for many of its students. This is a very great blessing for which we are very grateful to God for. An additional blessing is that one of our schools in Southern Virginia, Doss Elementary, is going to be retiring a significant amount of debt as well, as they have concluded a cell tower deal. And so we are looking forward that that school will receive significant relief from debt burdens as a result of the cell tower deal. Living Well has been blessed with financially as well. It has vacant space that it has needed to lease to renters, and it has been several years as we've been working through the process, and we are on the verge of renting the last amount of space at Living Well. This will assist in Living Well navigating the challenging times that all brick and mortar operations are having, and will enable it to continue its very important ministry on a daily basis. More guests and those who are not members of our church family visit Living Well than any one of our institutions. They know they will be cared for and prayed for there at Living Well. It's a tremendous ministry that will be blessed by continuing leasing arrangements of its vacant space. Lastly, we want to mention our high schools, and Tacoma Academy is meeting virtually at this time, and Steve Lang, our superintendent, will have more to say about that in a few minutes probably. But at this point, even though meeting virtually, I am informed that the collections of their accounts from their families of the students are being collected in a fashion, in a manner that is comparable to past years. And so we are blessed that its operations remain on a strong basis at this time. SVA, Shenandoah Valley Academy, its enrollment exceeds what it was in prior years. In fact, it exceeds what was budgeted for. In addition, a major renovation for the Zirkle Auditorium is underway and was completely provided for with funding from faithful alumni and other supporters by June of this year. And plans are going forward for that renovation to occur during the remainder of this current school year. Lastly, Camp Blue Ridge has faced significant challenges in regarding a new dining hall, kitchen space, and meeting space as well. Again, with the blessing of the Lord over the last number of years, funds have been made available, as well as the ability to gain financing so that a new facility can be built at Camp Blue Ridge, so that the ministry there can continue in a strong fashion. And we are very encouraged by what we have seen up to this date. And so these are just some of the financial blessings that God has poured out on our conference. And we want to be very grateful to him. And we want to also say thank you to each of you and those of your fellow members who have been faithful in your stewardship to God during this time of the pandemic and the specific challenges and the special challenges that he has brought to each one of us.
Thank you very much, Dave, for sharing that report. You know, a lot of things could go bad during this kind of time, but you know what? Faithfulness of the church, of each of our members, has just been astounding again. And, you know, and I think that's because as a people, we understand and desire God's mission to keep going forward, because we do believe in his very soon return. This time, and I'm aware that there's a lot of questions and stuff that are coming in. And some of the more general questions, we will not be answering those online. We will be given those questions, and we'll answer some of those here in just a little bit during our Q&A time. And so appreciate the questions that are coming in. And we'll be getting to those here in just a few moments. But I'd like to turn our attention now to our Vice President of Pastoral Ministry. And Rick Jordan, there's been a lot going on in our churches. They have not stopped.
That's right. Before I share some of the fascinating and inspiring stories that are taking place around our conference, I would like to mention that we recently filled an important position for the Potomac Conference, and that is the Pastoral Ministries Associate for the North. Paul Graham, who was the lead pastor at Restoration Praise Center for 12 years, has accepted the call to be the new Pastoral Ministries Associate for the North. And he began this new ministry for him a couple weeks ago. And he'll be working with our pastors and churches in the northern part of our conference. And we're just so happy that he's joined our team. In addition, Charles Tapp, the senior pastor of the Sligo Seventh-day Adventist Church, has also recently joined the Pastoral Ministries team by being an assistant for pastor development while also continuing to serve as senior pastor of Sligo. He will be working with our pastors to assist them in development and growth. The beginning of the year, we had all sorts of big plans for evangelism, outreach, and reaping events. But March came around and COVID-19 became part of our vocabulary, and everything shut down. The 185 churches closed. And so over the past few months, we have been trying to continue to move the mission forward in unique times. We no longer can worship, or could no longer worship in person. And so we had to change how we do so many things. And we recently had, as Bill mentioned, recently had a pastor's meeting last week. And to hear the stories that they shared, the pastors in the afternoon, they took up a majority of the afternoon by sharing some unique things that they're doing in how they're dealing with the challenges that they're facing. Today, there are, most of our churches are open, but 31 of our churches are currently closed. And most of them are in the north, the larger churches. And so they're trying to still connect with members in a virtual way. And they're connecting through social media in a variety of ways. Not all of the churches that are closed are in the north. There are a few that are still closed in other parts of our conference. In fact, this Sabbath, I will be speaking to the Farmville church in Virginia by telephone because they don't even have Zoom or some other social media. So we'll be having a church service by telephone. Churches are, and pastors, I just want to say thank you to each one of you who are just doing so many encouraging things that are really blessing the members in our conference. A few months ago, many of you had never even heard of what WhatsApp or Zoom or Twitter or some of those types of things. And now churches and members are very involved and engaged in ministry through those social media platforms. And I'm just amazed at how the message is still going forward. There have been, as Jose mentioned, there have been a number of baptisms and professions of faith because we are still having evangelistic meetings. There were plans for many, many evangelistic meetings and reaping series over this 2020.
And the truth for all of us is that we can, and we have made a lot of decisions along the way, but because of COVID and because of the different rulings of CDC and local governments, we have to change what we've already planned for, anticipating that the information we were working on before was going to be adequate for a little later, which it's not. And so that's part of our responsibility as leaders, as well as at the local congregations as well. So we must continue to adapt to the different kinds of COVID kinds of regulations that are coming to us. So thank you for helping us work through all of those, as well as the flexibility of each of you that have a school, and also even within the context of worship at your local level, the kinds of things that you're having to adjust and adapt to within the context of how we have to continue to find the right way to live life. I've received several different questions, and there may be some more coming in, so I'm going to answer the ones that I have, and then if you have some others there, we'll be glad to try to give those an answer as well. One of the questions that has come to me is in regards to how do we continue to look at within the context of our workforce, as well as the context of our conference, this whole thing called diversity. And what does that look like? What does that mean? Well, from our pastoral team, that we had the meetings, our pastoral ministries team came to administration, of which one of the pastoral VPs, obviously, Rick is on that team and was listening in. And the request came is the importance of having a task force. And so we have set up a task force to help us understand how do we continue to best deal with all the different issues of diversity that we continue to have in our conference in Potomac. It is an absolute blessing that we have this much diversity. And but it also creates a lot of different kinds of challenges. So we set up a panel of 13 individuals. Their first time that they met was in June. They're continuing the process of working through. At our pastors' meeting, they gave us a preliminary report. And on that commission are African Americans, there's Caucasians, there's Hispanics, and there's Asians. And we also have some educators on that commission as well, because the whole issues of justice, of diversity, does not impact just the local church, it also impacts the local school. And so we have set that up. They have given a preliminary report, as I say, last week to our pastors' meeting. We will be giving that report at our next executive committee. They will review it and then start to give us some directions as we dialogue through together to say, how do we continue to best deal with these kinds of issues within the great expanse of what we are and what we make up here in the Potomac Conference. The way our membership and stuff is divided up as far as just from an ethnic base is still somewhat in and of itself very, very diverse. Within the Hispanic community, African American, immigrant African, as well as Asian, as well as Caucasian, and other ethnic groups that are making up our conference. So we recently also did just a brief report or a study, I should say, that I also gave to our pastors last week as to how our employee force is also adjusting, meeting the needs of the constituency that we have. For example, within the context a few years ago, when I arrived here in the Potomac Conference, in the context of the office, there were 3 Hispanics in the office and 45 Caucasians. Today, there are 5 African Americans who are employees, 2 directors, an office assistant, and 2 assistant directors. There's also an Asian. The Caucasian force has gone from 45 down to 25. Hispanic has grown to 13. And we also have an additional 1 in the Latino. We're continuing to find ways that we can, how do we best continue within the diversity that we need to also minister to the needs of our conference together. Within the context of our own local pastoral force, a few years ago we had 3 Africans. That included 2 Ghanaians as well as an Ethiopian pastor. African Americans, we had 13. And we had 13 Asian, and we had 48 Caucasians, 27 Hispanic, and 2 Latino. Today, our mix has also shifted quite a bit. Now, the numbers won't add up exactly right at this point because we happen to have a few openings in some of our congregations. And so I can't just plot those because I have no idea what the ethnic makeup will be on some of the congregations, especially those that are English speaking. And so today we have 2 African, we have 2 African pastors, we have 19 African American, we have 12 Asian, we have 30 Caucasian, so that's dropped from 48 to 30. We have 29, that's increased a little bit, Hispanic pastors, as well as 4 Latino. And so our mix continues to shift and develop as we are trying to reach out to the groups that we are needing to reach to. For example, we recently added for a church planter that through our ministerial department, through Rick and Steve Letty, and then in partnership with the General Conference, we have recently hired a Chinese church planter specifically to reach our Chinese community on the 270 corridor. And they're helping us pay for a good majority of that salary for the first several years till we can get a church established on the 270 corridor. Well, we still have several other ethnic diverse groups that we need to find ways to find funding for so that we can minister to those groups as well, because all of these diverse groups have come here into Potomac, and God has given us the challenge to say, okay, they're there, keep praying, and together God will provide the necessary means for us to reach those groups and people groups for the kingdom. One of the other challenges that we have within the context of a workforce here in the Potomac Conference is where our location is. When the conference was established here in this location back in the early 50s, it made a lot of sense as far as where a good share of our population base was. At that time, the Potomac Conference was just about in the high 90s, if not almost 100% Caucasian, when it moved here in the 50s. It moved down here after World War II and a great fear of the Cold War that there could be potentially a nuclear attack on Washington, D.C. Now, that's all documented. I've read the documents and stuff. It's a very fascinating history. And so they initially were going to come down here to the Potomac, to Stanton, Virginia, because there was one of the very key influencers of this conference lived here in this area. Says, why don't you come down here temporarily until you kind of find another place to have an office? Because at that time, prior to that, our offices were up in the Tacoma Park area. Well, as you know, the Columbia Union's office were also at that time in the Tacoma Park area, and so was the General Conference. And the leadership of Potomac also felt that having all of these institutional groupings all located in one part of our conference was not healthy. So they accepted the brothers' invitation, and they provided them a place here. And when they had been here just a few years, the individual said, listen, I will buy there's a piece of property here. It's about 15 acres. I will buy that and I will give it to the conference for $1 if you will move here. Well, I have yet to see where an Adventist turns down what's perceived to be a really good deal. And that was perceived to be a really good deal. And so that is how the conference office became part of the Stanton community down here in this part of the Shenandoah Valley. And the Stanton community here has been a real blessing to the church in supplying employees and other kinds of things. However, over time, employee needs and stuff have dramatically changed. The need for travel more and more has consistently changed. And also, we have a challenge of also recruiting certain individuals of some of the minority groups to want to come and live in the Stanton area for a variety of reasons. One is more and more families who work for the church are two-income families. Finding other kinds of employment in a small community like this for a spouse is incredibly difficult. And unless you're willing to travel quite a distance for employment for a spouse, it's very difficult to find employment for many spouses in this area. A second thing that creates its own challenge is that some of the ethnic groups do not feel very safe living in the Stanton, Virginia area. And there are a variety of other reasons as well. And so we have, a number of years ago, by authorization of the executive committee, have placed the conference office property here up for sale in order to be able to have opportunity to look to move the conference office up closer to Northern Virginia, up closer to the Maryland area, because within a short circumference of that area, 73% of our total membership resides up in that area. We also believe that by moving up there, being able to recruit individuals to work within the context of the conference office will be able to help us with that, because more of our ethnic minorities live up in that area as compared down here in the Stanton, Virginia area. So we are continually trying to address that issue. Trying to sell a conference office during this time here in this area is not an easy task. And we are, as I say, it's been on the market for a number of years. And as we've had several developers that we've had to come look at it, said that this conference office, the building in of itself, was built for the Potomac Conference and is really not built for anybody else. And for someone else to purchase this, they would have to spend a lot of money retrofitting this building in order to be able to make it a good deal for them as well. So we are working through this issue with several developers and realtors helping us to know what is best. But we also recognize that we need to be able to sell this in order to be able then to have some capital in order to buy somewhere else as well. So we're putting all those pieces together, and we're looking forward to seeing what the Lord may do. But the reality is, we are a diverse conference, and we must continue to look at how we can continue to diversify, not just for the sake of diversification, but because we diversify means that we can better be, or we can be better equipped to actually fulfill the mission that God has called us to. And so we are going to, as a body, continue to work on that with the executive committee, and they're helping give us some very, very good directions in that area. Another question that has come that I can answer here, and that is a question in regards to, are we considering holding the constituency in a virtual way? Well, Jose Vasquez and myself and our AdCom team have had a lot of conversations about that. One of the realities that we're looking at is the equipment for doing virtual is getting much better. And for us to be able to set up the different kinds of things that are necessary to have a virtual constituency meeting, those resources are getting better. For example, you'd have to have a separate meeting room, which Zoom does now provide at a very well. It would be for like the nominating committee. You'd also have to have one for the Constitution and Bylaws Committee and other kinds of committees that have to meet on the day of session. One of the challenges that we do have still, believe it or not, with virtual, is there are still some portions of our conference that does not have good internet access at all. And so we have to be careful that we do not exclude any part of the conference for the sake of some of the other groups, just because they don't have access to a stable internet connection. And so we are weighing all of those things. And we also recognize that with the election coming up, there's all kinds of theories out there whether or not that's going to change this whole thing of COVID. But I believe, and we believe, as we have done our research, that the truth is that many are still going to be a little bit on the fearful side to really want to get back together for some time. And that's the bigger question that we have to answer. Whether the politicians figure it out and make us all feel better or not, there's still going to be a while, I believe, before people are going to feel comfortable getting together in large groups. So we're also considering what would it look like to have several different small areas to have a meeting in as well, and where we might be on 4 or 5 sites in order to have a constituency. So we are making those considerations. And at the present time, we are moving forward to our March 14th date and anticipating that we'll be able to, in one way or the other, to be able to have a constituency meeting. All right, are there some other questions that, that either Dave and or Jose that I should be aware of that maybe we might want to take a moment to address from our participants?
Well, there's a couple of questions that came in regards to people are asking, why don't we have the Pathfinders and Adventurers for the Hispanics to do them separately? Why the change and things like that? So that's kind of one of the general questions that has come up.
Okay, I can answer that in a general way, and I will. And I think that's one that we need to be able to probably, with those who have the most interest in that, to be able to address that, because that is obviously for a smaller portion of those who are online. We did address that at our previous, in a private way, at our previous town hall meeting. One of the things that is important to us as a conference of diversity is that we can celebrate that diversity, that we can celebrate it, but not in isolation of one another, but in togetherness. So the role of the conference is to bring us all together, not to continue to separate us into isolation. And so it does not in any way negate if a few clubs here or a few clubs there want to get together and have a camp out together. There is nothing that stops anybody from doing that, because we have that freedom of movement, we have that freedom of choice. But from the context of the conference exists to represent all of the people groups, to bring us together. And so rather than separating us, we find ways that we can continue to come together. Now, it may be that we have to find better ways that we can actually, when we are together, to have better communication, making sure everybody understands, everybody, you know, whether there's language barriers or other kinds of things, that we can adequately take care of those kinds of things. But the role of the conference is to bring together, not to separate. And so that's why we don't, generally within the context of our schools, we don't have schools just for Hispanics, or schools just for the Vietnamese, or schools just for the Nepalese. We have schools for Potomac Conference. And now if a local church sets something up like that, that is something that a local church would have the right to do. But as a conference, we find as many ways as we can to draw together, not to go into isolation. But one way we can, if the individual, I have no idea who it is that's asking that question, would like to give to either Jose and or Dave and or Deborah, one of those, and would like a more specific to have that dialogue, we can have our Pathfinder coordinator along with Jose Esposito, our Director of Hispanic Ministries, can also help address that issue, where we have had many conversations together in support of that issue.
Here's another question. Our conference demographics is very diverse. Can you please share the statistics of diversity changes within the AdCom leadership? If there has been some, and what are their plans to add some diversity in it?
Yeah, no, that's a good question, and we want to be able to add diversity as we can within the context of the administrative team. Again, as I just explained, within the context of our location, we have invited many of other ethnic backgrounds to come and serve on our administrative team. But because of our location, they have pointed out they do not feel that bringing a family of diversity into the Stanton area is a good decision on their part. And so we have been turned down on multiple occasions by individuals of diversity who do not want to come and live in this area. So that is why the importance of it is that we are able, hopefully in the very near future, to be able to move our conference office into an area where all the different groups would feel much safer and feel for their family, for what their needs of their family would be much better met in a different part of this conference.
Bill, here's a question, and it relates to this topic as well. It says, are there any plans to end church and conference racial segregation?
That's a very interesting question. The reason why it's interesting, and I don't have all of the statistics on that, but what I do know is as we have other denominations look at us as Seventh-day Adventists, especially in the greater Maryland area, one of the interesting things that they see about us is that Seventh-day Adventists actually have the most diversity sitting on the pews in Sabbath or working together than any other denomination that they know. Can we do better? We have to keep trying to work on that better. But from those of us who, we're in this, and sometimes we might see this little idiosyncrasy here or there, but the reality is within the context of Potomac, we have probably the most diverse on Sabbath morning, and within the context of our congregations, pretty much of any other portion of the work of the church. Now, does it mean that we can't do better? Well, we still have some cultural issues that we have to also face in a very direct kind of a way. One is, for whatever reason, in some of our congregations, there is known as white flight, potentially. And so some of a different race may show, and so then some of the Caucasian, after a while, feel like they don't want to attend there anymore. Or it could be that the church was established as an immigrant church right off the bat, and so it has not completely transitioned into a second or third generation of the immigrants, or them being able to be inclusive because of language of the other groups in the area. Now, we do have a church that Rick is working with right now, and that a few years ago took a vote that they were going to, they felt that although they started out as an immigrant church, they need to more clearly represent the community by which they are, which is not their language of what they're used to speaking. And so they have made a conscious decision that they are going to start to utilize, and that the language that many of them are used to will become secondary because the people around them don't speak that language. And so that is the importance of every local congregation making that decision. If you look around on Sabbath morning and all you see are people that look familiar to you as far as the same color of skin or the same language, you might want to take an action within your church board, within your church community there, to say, what can we do to start to reflect where we are better? What does that look like? It could be that some of our congregations are going to need to look at the possibility of becoming missionaries. And that is that maybe it's a Hispanic church is going to need to become a missionaries into the Caucasian English speaking, because it's a very unchurched English speaking area, but that's what makes up the community where they are. So maybe many of our Hispanics are going to have the privilege of becoming missionaries. It could be that maybe some of our Asians are going to become missionaries into maybe to a Hispanic area that's close, that doesn't have a church yet. I have no idea, but that's one of the things is we have to continue to look at. The communities where we are, does our congregation match the community where we are worshiping? If it does, then keep going straight forward. But if it doesn't, that may be the time that God is calling you to be a missionary in that community. And that should be a good discussion with the board. And it would be very appropriate to call on our pastoral ministries team to come and have a conversation with you, to guide you through that conversation as to what that might be.
Here's a question regarding some concerns regarding the COVID-19 pandemic, as well as requirements and regulations coming from our public health authorities and from the state and counties. It says that, are we endangering our religious right to assemble? freedom of worship by closing churches and yielding to the mandates? Is this a separation of church and state situation that we need to address?
That is a real question in a real time, in a real world. I get emails on that frequently, and I get articles from around the country. And one of the things that we have to be careful with is that fine line where Scripture says very clearly, for example, in the book of 2 Peter, or 1 Peter and stuff, and 2 Peter, writings of Paul, where within reason we are to obey as part of the civil governments. That's a very clear mandate from Scripture, and even Jesus alludes to that in the Sermon on the Mount. Now, one of the interesting things is COVID has in no way forced us not to worship or to still meet together. It may not be in person, but it doesn't mean that through technology and other kinds of things that we cannot do it. Nor does it say, as the early church, how did the early church get started? They were all house churches. They were all small groups. That was how the church got started, and they met in homes and small dwellings like that all the way up until, believe it or not, this was a hard thing even for me to understand, until Constantine, who brought in a lot of different kinds of worship experiences. But the church, as we now experience it, the building where we come into our own bricks and mortar, really started around the time of Constantine. And so we are not restricted in our worship. We are not being stopped to saying, you cannot worship as a Seventh-day Adventist. We may not be able to go to the bricks and mortar. However, in most of the cases, as I am reading within the jurisdictions, most congregations can be up to at least 25, many up to 50, some even up to 75% of capacity at a church gathering. Now, for a church meeting or something, it's still other kinds of restriction. But it's one of those things where each area, we have left it to each local church to make that decision as to how they believe within their community, within the requirements of the CDC, as well as the local jurisdictions, etc. How can they still be safe? How can they still maintain the worship that they feel? And that is to be done at the local level. So that is something that each local church board should be, and I believe is, wrestling with. I don't know, Rick, if you have something you'd like to comment on as well, because you've been in touch with all of the congregations.
Yeah, a lot of the churches are, we have left it up to the local churches and the leadership of each church to determine if it is safe for that community to meet together. And many of them, like I mentioned earlier, around 150 or so churches or companies and groups are meeting in a smaller number than what full capacity would be. But the ones that have chosen not to, it is not a mandate from the conference or even from local government that says you cannot open in any form. It's the local congregations and their leadership have determined that for that group, it is best that they not meet together because most of the members are not comfortable coming together and meeting. But we are not telling them they can't. It is a local decision. And so they're looking at plans as to how they can eventually open again. But in the meantime, they're reaching out through various forms of technology to keep the mission of the church going forward.
Yes, as Rick mentioned, one of those, as antiquated as it may still feel, he's doing one by telephone this
By
Sabbath.
telephone.
I will be preaching to an outdoor service this coming Sabbath. I have preached in churches. I've preached in drive-in churches. And so the creativity has been great in trying to deal with this issue of worship. I have a question here that I think I can answer. Maybe, Dave, I'll have you answer it. And here's the question, Dave. It says, has there been any discussion about the conference using or buying, leasing the vacant J&A building?
There actually has been full consideration of the J&A facility as to its usage over the last several years. There, of course, are many challenges with utilizing that facility because it is zoned in specific ways. In addition, the question that as a conference we have had to answer is, if we were to utilize that per se for the conference itself, is that in the location that would best serve all the constituents of the conference? And the answer to that was not so. That was not the best location. The other issue, of course, is that in the merger of the J&A Elementary and the Sligo Elementary, the school property was intended to be used as an asset to be sold and converted into cash so that it could help the mission of the two schools. It was a resource. And the schools who exercised day-to-day control of that facility made it part of their plans. And so it was not within the purview of the conference to write in and to tell them as to what they should use this building for. And as I said, it wasn't probably the best use for it anyway. But it was part of their specific plan to help their merger move forward in a productive way. And so they moved forward in that regard. And as I said earlier, the sale of that facility has been concluded, and it's going to be a great blessing to the school of Tacoma Academy Prep.
All right, thank you, Dave, and appreciate that. I think we have time for one more question, and then I'll have a few closing words. And as I promised, we'd be wrapping up right about 8 o'clock. Is there any other questions that you have?
Yes, this is a question that comes, and it says, of course, in this current situation, there is a great need for technology. And how can we teach and help our churches learn to use this technology to share the Word of God with both members and non-members during this situation that we face?
Maybe, Rick, I'll turn that over to our pastor, because that's one of the things that we've been working on. And it's one of the things why Charles has come on board and some of the other things. So why don't you talk to us just briefly about how we can continue to service that?
Sure. The challenge with technology is you have to know technology. And so there has been a high learning curve for many of us as to how we do it successfully and in a way that's effective. And we have been working with our pastors to help support them in this area, but there is still a lot of work that still needs to be done. And one thing that we're doing with Charles Tapp coming on board as assistant to pastoral ministries to help with pastor development is looking at ways in which we can help pastors who are good at this or other professionals that are good in this area to help others who are needing to grow and learning some of the technical things. So we plan to continue to work with churches and pastors to help educate them in this new form of communication.
Yeah, this is something that has been sprung upon all of us at a very rapid rate, and we've had to be able to, we're kind of building the airplane as we fly, proverbially. And but that is a very pertinent question. We're going to continue to study that in ways that we can help train and equip. And so if there are any of the local congregations, what we are finding in many of our congregations is that there are some very, very gifted lay people who really know this stuff, and it's part of their journey. One of the other things that, and I have no context of how this question is being asked, but if you have a few people around who are under the age of 30, you might want to invest in them real fast, because they probably have it figured out or could figure it out in a quarter of the time of what it would take me to figure it out. And that's just the reality of what we have. Now, I know that there are still probably some other questions that are coming in. And if I'm going to ask our team if they could make sure that we get those questions, and hopefully we can, if the individual doesn't mind, would give us a way to contact them, because we want to be able to respond to those questions and get you connected with the right people that can help answer those questions. And again, we want to say thank you. Thank you for taking some time of your evening. I know that Monday Night Football is coming up, elections are coming up tomorrow, but you know what? The work of the church is still going on. We want to thank you for investing tonight in taking some time and some energy to come and ask some questions. But I know above all that you also are praying for the church. You're praying for your congregation, the congregations around you, that we will fight not discouragement during this time, but opportunities during this time. Not setbacks during this time, but innovations during this time. We all are being impacted in one way or another by COVID. You either know people or your own family has been impacted by COVID. I have several friends and colleagues who have been impacted by COVID. That is also our world. But what we also must understand is even though the devil is doing everything he can to get us off the mission, we also know that the devil knows that his time is short. And so that should even spur us on some more, knowing that in him, in Christ, all things are possible. So thank you for your faithfulness. Thank you for what you are doing on a daily as well as a weekly basis to continue to find ways to get this message out to the world. So at this time, I would like to pray for you as we bring this time together, this town hall, to a close. Let's pray, shall we? Father, thank you for everyone who has signed in this evening. I just pray that they too will sense a peace that passes understanding as we move through this time. I pray, Father, that they will sense an outpouring of your Spirit, that they too will have their eyes open to find ways that they can continue to serve and be creative and create the right kinds of change that will make a difference in their community and in the community of believers. And Father, may we continue to grow in our diversity. May we continue to grow in understanding that diversity and caring for the diversity that's among us. For Father, you have said that as we come and we recognize what you have done for us, it is our privilege and responsibility to bring other souls, disciple them. For you have said, you chose us. We didn't choose you. You chose us, and we could bear fruit that would last. And so you gave us a command, love one another. So Father, give us that courage. Give us that capacity. Bless us, your church, in your name. Amen. Thank you each one for coming on board this evening. Stay strong. We'll do another one of these, and we'll get the word out. Thank you, and good night.